I never wanted to be the kind of person who had problems with their neighbors. When I bought my townhouse in Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago, I was thrilled. It was the perfect location, close to my consulting firm downtown, with enough space for my home office and a small patio where I could enjoy my morning coffee. The neighborhood was quiet, well-maintained, and the homeowners association seemed reasonable enough on paper. What I did not know was that my next-door neighbor, Karen Hutchins, was the HOA president and had a very different interpretation of what reasonable meant. Karen was one of those people who seemed to have been born clutching a rulebook. She was in her mid-50s, always impeccably dressed in pastel cardigans and pressed khakis, with hair sprayed into an immovable blonde helmet. She drove a white SUV that she washed every single Saturday at exactly 9 a.m., and she had opinions about everything. From the moment I moved in, she made it clear that she was watching. My welcome basket came with a smile, a plate of dry cookies, and a highlighted copy of the HOA bylaws with specific sections marked for my immediate attention. At first, I thought she was just enthusiastic about community standards. I could handle that. But then the notices started. My doormat was apparently 3 inches too wide and violated the approved entry decor guidelines. My car, a perfectly nice Mercedes sedan, was parked 2 inches over the designated line in my own driveway, which she documented with photographs and timestamps. When I planted flowers in my small front bed, she left a violation notice citing that the petunia to marigold ratio was not in compliance with the approved color scheme palette outlined in Appendix 7, subsection C of the Community Handbook. Make sure to hit that like button if you are enjoying this story of petty HOA revenge, and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more tales of entitled neighbors getting exactly what they deserve. I tried to be diplomatic. I really did. I attended HOA meetings. I nodded politely when Karen droned on about the critical importance of maintaining uniform mailbox heights, and I even volunteered for the Neighborhood Watch Committee. I figured if I played by the rules and showed I was a team player, she would ease up. Instead, it seemed to encourage her. The more compliant I was, the more creative her complaints became. She cited me for my porch light being on past 11 p.m. on a work night, claiming it created light pollution. She measured my grass with a ruler and left a violation notice when it was allegedly 1/4 of an inch taller than the maximum allowed height. She even complained about the brand of trash bags I used, saying the black plastic was not aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood standards. The townhouses in Willowbrook Estates were built with shared walls, a common design for this type of property. My unit and Karen's unit shared a wall that ran down the center of both homes, dividing our living rooms. The construction was solid, built to code with proper insulation and sound barriers. In the 3 years I had lived there, I had never heard so much as a peep from her side, and I made sure to be an equally considerate neighbor. No loud music, no parties, no disturbances of any kind. I was a quiet professional who worked long hours and valued peace and quiet just as much as anyone else. But apparently, that was not good enough for Karen. 6 months ago, things took a turn from annoying to absolutely insane. I came home from a business trip to find a formal HOA violation notice on my door. This one was different. It was not about my grass or my doormat or my trash bags. This one claimed that I was in violation of the noise ordinance due to excessive disturbances during evening hours. I was baffled. I had been out of town for 4 days. I called Karen immediately to clarify what had to be a mistake. Karen, this is ridiculous. I was not even home. I was in Seattle for a conference. You can check with the front gate logs if you want. Her response was chilling in its smugness. The HOA board has received multiple complaints. We take all violations seriously. Perhaps you should be more mindful of your activities. She hung up before I could respond. Multiple complaints? I lived alone, and I had been traveling. This did not make any sense. Then the letters started coming. One a week, like clockwork. Each one claimed noise violations at times when I could prove I was either not home or sitting quietly in my own living room reading or working. I started documenting everything. I kept detailed logs of my whereabouts, I saved boarding passes and hotel receipts, and I even installed a decibel meter in my living room to record actual noise levels. The data was irrefutable. There were no excessive noises coming from my unit. But Karen did not care about facts. She cared about control. The situation escalated when I received a letter stating that due to my continued violations, the HOA was considering a lien on my property. A lien over fabricated noise complaints. I hired a lawyer, a good one, and we prepared to fight this nonsense. My attorney, Richard Chen, was a sharp guy who specialized in property law and had dealt with overzealous HOA boards before. He reviewed all my documentation and shook his head in disbelief. This is harassment, plain and simple. The good news is you have an airtight case. The bad news is that fighting an HOA can be expensive and time-consuming, even when you are clearly in the right. I authorized him to send a cease and desist letter to Karen and the HOA board, laying out all the evidence that her complaints were baseless and warning that continued harassment would result in legal action. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought wrong. 2 weeks after the cease and desist was delivered, I came home to discover something that made my blood run cold. There was a hole in my living room wall. Not a small hole, not a crack or a minor damage. An actual, deliberate hole, roughly 8 inches in diameter, cut cleanly through the drywall of the shared wall between my townhouse and Karen's. I could see straight through into her living room. She was standing on the other side, and when she saw me staring in shock, she smiled. Just conducting an inspection. The HOA bylaws grant the board access to shared structural elements for maintenance purposes. I have reason to believe there may be issues with the insulation that are causing sound to transfer between our units. I am within my rights. I was speechless. She had cut a hole into my wall, into my home. I immediately called the police and filed a report for property damage and trespassing. The officers who responded were sympathetic, but explained that because she was claiming it was HOA business related to a shared wall, it fell into a gray area that would need to be sorted out in civil court. They documented everything and gave me a case number, but they could not arrest her on the spot. Next, I called Richard. If I was angry before, I was absolutely furious now. This had gone way beyond petty HOA complaints. This was destruction of property, invasion of privacy, and blatant harassment. Richard was equally outraged and immediately filed for an emergency restraining order and a lawsuit for damages, harassment, and abuse of power. But here is the thing about Karen. She was not just petty. She was vindictive. And she had underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. You see, I did not just own a consulting firm. I owned a very successful consulting firm that specialized in real estate development and property law. I had spent 15 years building relationships with developers, contractors, lawyers, and city officials. I had connections, resources, and most importantly, I had the knowledge to play the long game. And after that hole appeared in my wall, I decided it was time Karen learned a very important lesson about picking your battles. I started by doing my homework. I pulled every single document related to Willowbrook Estates, the HOA, and the property structure. I reviewed the original development plans, the bylaws, the covenants and conditions and restrictions, the master deed, and every amendment that had ever been filed. I spent hours in the county recorder's office pulling records. And that is when I found it. The loophole that would change everything. Willowbrook Estates was built on a plot of land that had been subdivided from a larger parcel back in the 1990s. When the developer created the townhouse community, they retained ownership of a small strip of common land that ran along the back of all the properties. This strip, about 20 feet wide, was designated as a common area for utilities and drainage. According to the master deed, this strip was owned collectively by all the homeowners through the HOA, but it could be purchased by an individual owner if approved by a majority vote of the board, or if the HOA ever voted to dissolve or sell common assets. Here is where it got interesting. The strip of common land directly behind Karen's townhouse was the access point for her back patio, and the only way to reach her backyard without going through her house. There was a small gate in her back fence that opened onto this common strip, which then connected to the main walking path of the community. Without access to that strip, her back patio was essentially landlocked. I started attending every single HOA meeting. I reviewed every financial record I could get my hands on, which as a homeowner I had a legal right to request. And what I found was alarming. Karen had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom for years. There were questionable expenditures, missing receipts, and a pattern of awarding maintenance contracts to companies owned by her friends and family members at inflated prices. Nothing outright illegal, but definitely unethical and potentially actionable. I quietly reached out to other homeowners who had been on the receiving end of Karen's petty tyranny over the years. Turns out, I was not alone. There was a whole network of people who had been cited, fined, harassed, and bullied. Together, we represented about 40% of the homeowners in the community. We started organizing. I brought in Richard to explain everyone's rights, and we began building a case not just against Karen, but against the way she had been running the entire HOA. At the next board meeting, I made my move. I presented a formal motion to call for a special election to recall the entire HOA board due to financial mismanagement and abuse of authority. I had documentation, witness statements, and a lawyer present to ensure everything was done by the book. Karen tried to shut it down, but I had done my homework. According to the bylaws, any homeowner could call for a special election with a petition signed by at least 25% of the community. I had 40%. Her face went purple. She sputtered about proper procedures and seniority and respect for the board, but it did not matter. The vote was scheduled for 6 weeks out, and I spent that time campaigning. I knocked on doors, I hosted informational sessions in my living room, and I made sure every single homeowner knew exactly what Karen had been doing. The hole in my wall became a symbol of her overreach, and I was not shy about showing people the photos. But that was just phase 1. While the special election was brewing, I was working on something much bigger. I contacted the developer who had originally built Willowbrook Estates. He had retired and was living in Florida, but he still had ties to the area and remembered the property well. I explained the situation and made him an offer. I wanted to purchase the strip of common land behind Karen's property. He thought I was joking at first, but when I explained my plan, he loved it. He still had some influence with the remaining members of the original development company, and he agreed to help facilitate the sale. Here is the beautiful part. According to the master deed, the HOA could vote to sell common land with a 2/3 majority vote of the homeowners. But there was an alternative clause that almost no one knew about. If the HOA was ever found to be in breach of its fiduciary duties to the homeowners, the common land could revert to individual sale at the discretion of a court-appointed mediator. And guess what? Karen's financial mismanagement and abuse of power qualified as a breach of fiduciary duty. Richard filed a motion with the court outlining all of Karen's violations, backed by testimony from dozens of homeowners and financial records that clearly showed mismanagement. The judge appointed a mediator to review the HOA's governance, and within 3 weeks, The mediator issued a report recommending that certain common assets be made available for individual purchase to mitigate the financial damage Karen had caused. The strip of land behind Karen's property was classified as one of those assets. I submitted a purchase offer at fair market value. There was a 10-day window for other homeowners to submit competing offers, but I had made sure everyone in the community knew that I was buying it specifically to solve the HOA's financial problems that Karen had created. No one else bid. The sale went through. Now I owned the 20-foot strip of land that provided the only access to Karen's backyard. And here is where my consulting expertise really came into play. I immediately filed for a permit to install a privacy fence along the entire length of my new property. 8 feet tall, solid wood, professionally installed, and 100% compliant with all local zoning laws. The fence would run right along the edge of my property line, which meant it would block the gate that Karen used to access her backyard from the common area. She did not realize what was happening until the construction crew showed up. I was standing in my backyard, overseeing the installation, when I heard her screaming. She came running out of her house, still in her bathrobe, her hair for once not perfectly sprayed into place. "What are you doing? You cannot build it there. That is common land." I smiled calmly and pulled out the property deed. "Actually, Karen, it is my land now. I purchased it legally through the court-appointed mediator after your financial mismanagement was documented. I have all the permits, and the fence is fully compliant with zoning regulations. You are welcome to review the paperwork." Her face went from red to white. "But I need access to my backyard. That gate is the only way." I nodded sympathetically. "I understand that is inconvenient. However, the easement that granted you access was tied to the land being HOA-owned common property. Now that it is privately owned, that easement is void unless the new owner grants permission. And given that you cut a hole in my wall, filed false complaints against me, and made my life a living nightmare for months, I think you can understand why I am not inclined to grant that permission. You cannot do this. I will sue you. The HOA will never allow this. Actually, Karen, you no longer have the authority to speak for the HOA. The special election results came in yesterday. You and your entire board were recalled by a vote of 78% of the homeowners. There is a new board now, and they are very interested in conducting a full audit of your tenure. As for suing me, you are welcome to try, but everything I have done is completely legal. I own the land, I have the permits, and I am building on my own property. Good luck finding a lawyer who will take that case." The construction crew finished installing the fence over the next 2 days. It was beautiful, professionally done, stained a rich cedar color that would age gracefully. And it completely blocked Karen's access to her backyard. If she wanted to use her patio now, she would have to carry everything through her house, through her living room, through her kitchen, and out the back door. No more convenient gate. No more easy access. Her backyard had effectively become a walled fortress that was a massive pain to actually use. But I was not done yet. Remember that hole she cut in my wall? I had it repaired by a professional contractor, and I sent her the bill. All $1,500 of it. When she refused to pay, I filed a small claims lawsuit. The judge took one look at the police report, the photos, and her laughable excuse about HOA inspections, and ruled in my favor. Judgment against Karen Hutchins for $1,500 plus court costs. Then, there was the matter of the noise complaints. Since Karen was no longer on the HOA board, the new board reviewed all of her filed complaints against me. They found a pattern of false reports, fabricated violations, and abuse of power. They issued a formal apology to me and expunged all the violations from my record. But more than that, they discovered that Karen had been filing violations against multiple homeowners without proper evidence, essentially using the HOA as her personal weapon. The new board implemented new oversight rules and required that all future violations be backed by photographic evidence, third-party verification, or other objective proof. The final piece of my revenge came a few months later. Karen's townhouse went up for sale. Apparently, living next to the person who had systematically dismantled her reign of terror and cut off access to her backyard was too much for her to handle. I was very interested to see how that sale would go, given that any potential buyer would discover that the backyard access situation was less than ideal. Property values being what they are, that kind of detail tends to matter. Out of curiosity, I attended the open house. Karen was not there, of course. She had hired a real estate agent to handle everything. I walked through casually, just another potential buyer. When I got to the backyard, I made sure to ask the agent very loudly how one would access the patio for things like furniture delivery or landscaping equipment. The agent stumbled through an explanation about going through the house, and I watched as several other potential buyers exchanged glances and made notes. The house sat on the market for 4 months. For months in a hot real estate market where similar townhouses were selling in days. Eventually, Karen dropped the price by $60,000 just to get an offer. Even then, the buyers negotiated her down another $10,000 because of the access issue. She lost $70,000 in equity because of a problem she had created herself by being so vindictive that her neighbor had to take extraordinary measures to protect himself. But the absolute best moment, the cherry on top of this entire situation, came about a week before her sale finally closed. I was working in my home office when I heard a commotion outside. I looked out my window and saw Karen standing in front of my fence, staring at a small brass plaque that I had installed on the gate I had built into the fence. The gate was on my side, of course, providing me access to the walking path. But the plaque was visible from both sides. It read, "This fence was erected in accordance with all local zoning laws and property rights. Access is granted at the sole discretion of the property owner. Inquiries regarding access should be directed to the owner in writing, with sufficient notice and proper respect for property rights and personal boundaries." Karen stood there reading it over and over, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. And then, in a moment I will treasure forever, she turned and looked directly at my window where I was standing with my coffee mug. Our eyes met. And in that instant, I saw the exact moment when the full scope of what I had done finally hit her. I had not just blocked her access to her backyard. I had not just gotten her removed from the HOA board. I had not just cost her tens of thousands of dollars in property value. I had used her own tactics against her. Her obsession with rules, regulations, bylaws, and property rights had been turned into a weapon that she had no defense against. Every single move I had made was legal, documented, and justified. I had played by the rules better than she ever could have imagined. And in doing so, I had proven that petty tyranny only works until you encounter someone who knows how to use the system more effectively than you do. The look on her face was one of absolute, complete, and utter defeat. It was not just anger or frustration. It was the dawning realization that she had poked the wrong person, that her need for control had led her to make an enemy of someone with the resources, knowledge, and patience to systematically dismantle everything she had built. She had cut a hole in my wall thinking she was untouchable, and in response, I had built a fence that would stand as a permanent reminder of her hubris. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? She turned away and walked back to her townhouse, her shoulders slumped, defeated in a way that went far beyond just losing a property dispute. And I took a sip of my coffee, smiled, and went back to work. If you enjoyed watching Karen get exactly what she deserved, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people learning that karma is real and sometimes it wears a suit and carries property deeds.